Okay, hello. All right. So nobody really saw that first video and whatever. I'm gonna tell the guys when I get back to work to check them out. I'm away from work at the moment, so um anyway, this particular video is about the possibility of a second American Civil War, which I do believe that eventually there will be a second American Civil War. Um, Mostly due to the divisions in our country and a lot of it really due to our politicians. They actually drive us to be more divided. But all the same, I just want to jump into this. I don't think people realize just how terrible a civil war would be in our country, and I also don't think that most people realize what the result of a civil war in our country would be. Essentially, if we did have a civil war, more than likely, what would end up happening is at the end of it, we would end up with some sort of uh, basically like a communist dictatorship, something like that, a very socialist type government. If there was a civil war, uh, it would not be a democratic government that won, that took over. It really is pretty easy to see as to why, and like I said, I think a lot of people have misconceptions about it. I'm gonna see if I can share my screen here, and we're gonna take a look at some of this. All right, that's cool. No, I don't want to do that. Let's see here. I have no idea if this is sharing my screen. I'm gonna go with it is, but share. That's kind of cool looking. All right. So here we go. Let's go. Let's go and take a look back here. This these were results from the latest presidential election in 2016. I'm going to take a look at a few specific areas here, areas that I think you'll find very interesting. First one I had was California. I don't think people realize just how bloody a civil war in America today would be. You ask people, and they would tell you that, and I mean, you can look at the vote totals right here and see that, obviously, far more people voted for Democrat than Republican in California. You would assume that that in some sort of a civil war, that whatever side was more left leaning, um, more liberal, that is the side that would win in California. And you'd be right, but you're also discounting just how terribly bloody it would be for them to win. I mean, when you look at these numbers, say 8 million people, that's way bigger than 4 million, but 4 million is not an insignificant number. And you look at some of these areas too, and I can show you. So you look at Los Angeles. Los Angeles, an area like that, very quickly they would have, anyone who was conservative wanted to support the conservative side of said civil war. They would have them in check pretty quick. These are just, by the way, the numbers of people who voted. There are far more people there actually in Los Angeles. And I can't really say, how those who didn't vote, where they would stand in terms of which side they would support. Odds are it'd be pretty likely they wouldn't really support either side, to be honest. Most people don't vote for a particular reason, they don't really care. Um, One of the things that I'd like to point out, though, yeah, is like you got your major cities. For the most part, most of them would the liberal side would be able to control the conservative side pretty quickly. San Diego is actually not one of them. I think they misspelled San Diego. Looks like they spelled it San Diego. That's weird. Anyways, you look at that though. It's 700,000 to it's almost 500,000, but that's not an insignificant amount of people, and that's not that many more people that supported Clinton over Trump in that particular area that you would look at it and say, oh, they'll easily be able to control the conservatives there. And I mean, you're looking at bloody fight there. You look at some of the counties near Los Angeles, that would be another bloody fight. Um, that one probably not so much. Look over here, this was a good one. Yeah, that would be another bloody fight. Generally speaking, by the time things were said and done in California, that state would end up supporting the more liberal side of this particular uh, civil war. Let's go look at other areas that would be bloody. Actually, no. You know what? Instead of doing that, what we're going to do, I want to show you because a lot of people don't realize just which states would end up supporting, um, you know, sort of the conservative side or the liberal side of such a civil war. And later on, I'll also get into the fact that there's going to be multiple sides. It's not just going to be two, by the way. But let's look at Texas. So you look at Texas, and uh, Texas was won overall by Trump by about looks like it's about 800,000 votes. A pretty significant number. I would tell you now, Texas would probably end up as a state supporting um, the more liberal side of a future civil war. And one of the reasons for that is actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You just look at it, this entire state, and this is actually true over most of the country. If an area is more rural, it's going to usually be more conservative. It's almost always the case. Those areas are less densely populated, obviously. Suburban areas are typically more swing type areas. They'll swing back and forth between conservatives and liberals, and then liberals tend to be centered in the massive area, the major areas of population, such as, Houston here. And you can see that there. That would be a bloody fight. You look here, bloody fight, but honestly, more than likely in the Dallas area, the liberals would not find it that difficult to control the conservatives that were there. You look down here, right here near Austin. Like I said, you can look in these suburban areas and you see that they're kind of more swing areas, but there's your major center of population there and heavily supported Clinton over Trump. One of the things that people don't realize about this is it does matter, especially in like a civil war, where all the people are. You have to be able to get all of the people together. They have to come together to form one side versus the other. And unfortunately, they're very dispersed out here, just all around. And these are just vote totals. Again, like I said, the population, obviously is much different in those areas, but it's very dispersed. There's a lot of population in Texas that doesn't necessarily live in one of the major cities. They live in suburban areas or they actually live in rural areas as well. It's a very large state. Um, this is important. This is important because there just wouldn't be enough time, more than likely, for everybody else in Texas to gather together to fight against the people living in the big cities. By the time they got together, large swaths of the uh, state would already be controlled by the liberals, whatever very liberal faction, was in this civil war. And it's more than likely the state again because the major population centers, and this is something you'd see replaying itself all the way across the nation. Major population centers would be able to control that state effectively, um, and would probably join the more liberal side. Other thing that I wanted to get to with a new possible American Civil War, like I said, it wouldn't be just two sides. There aren't just two sides. When you look at our politics today, it's not just one particular view versus another particular view. You actually have people that are moderates, that are more towards the center, and you have, I mean, seriously, you've got literally views all over the place. I don't think I need to screen share anymore, so let me see if I can turn that off. Don't really know how to do that. Stop screen sharing. There we go. All right. So you'd actually have multiple sides. And it's pretty evident from looking at our politics that you can't really peg people into one particular box versus another. You know, there are people out there who are, very liberal, would not be okay with a communist dictatorship. There are people out there who are very conservative, would not be okay with, necessarily like a fascist type government. Um, are there some people in these groups who would be okay with that? Yeah, there are. And guess what? During a civil war, those groups would come out. They would make themselves known. Um, Really, the reason that the end result of this is probably some sort of like tyrannical hyper left government. I showed you that the left pretty much has the ability to um, control their respective states because of the fact that they're centered in the major population centers. But why then would it have to be, say, like a communist dictatorship or some sort of tyrannical government, as opposed to just more of a socialist type democracy? Um, because the people who would want sort of a more socialist type democracy are not likely to cause a civil war. Um, the same thing could be true to when you're talking about those on the other side, on the right. Obviously, most people on the left and most people on the right, they don't really want a civil war. It's our politicians right now that are driving us further apart and trying to drive us more towards the extremes. But the main thing to look at there is you have to look at who would start, this fighting, and uh, where their centers of support are, how many people they could draw, and then the final part is, unfortunately, it's the most brutal people, such as those who are extreme, like who would want, some sort of tyrannical type communist government, or would want, some sort of fascist government on the far right. Those are the most brutal people usually, and unfortunately, during some sort of a civil war, some sort of major conflict like that, brutality does play its own role, and it is actually a pretty extreme factor. when you, it's because of their blatant disregard for anyone who disagrees with them. Ergo, when you look at, I mean, it may start out as almost like a socialist democracy type movement, but it's not going to stay that way. It's going to be hijacked by the extremists on the left, and um, they're more brutal. They not only will they brutalize people on the right, but they'll brutalize the people on the left that don't fully support them too. You saw this. This is actually straight out of history, by the way. Straight out of history. If you don't believe that, you're actually just go study, go look it up, because that's really what happened in Russia. When you look at the Russian Revolution, which a lot of people are mistaken in their belief. They believe that the Russian Revolution led directly to communism in Russia, and that's actually inaccurate. The Russian Revolution ended up overthrowing the Tsar, and there was actually a democratic government that was set up there. It was sort of a democratic republic. That existed for a short amount of time before the Bolshevik Revolution. When the Bolshevik Revolution happened, the Bolsheviks basically decided that, and the government that had been set up was quite socialist. It was quite far, it was, well, I can't really say far left, but it was pretty left leaning politics there in Russia at the time. The Bolsheviks didn't feel like they were far enough left. And one of the things that happened, they did brutalize people on the left, people who normally should have been agreeing with them most of the time, and they brutalized the Mensheviks among other groups. It's very, very disturbing. The Bolsheviks, when they took over, I can't give you exact percentages, I don't know them, but I would estimate basically no more than about 30% of the country really would have called themselves Bolsheviks. That's interesting to look at because how does 30% of the country take over the entire country? Well, again, it was because of where they were centered in those major population centers. Um, they were the ones who were able to get together these large, huge armies and march out to basically, I mean, not only did they annihilate the people in their paths, but they made other people who might have gotten together and opposed them too afraid to do so. So that's the likely outcome of what would happen here. It's really not. It's not an inexact parallel. I mean, it's not a perfect parallel, mind you, but it's not inexact. In the end, you'd be talking about millions of deaths, millions, probably tens of millions, to be honest. The first American Revolution, American Civil War, claimed lives about 600,000. It depends on the figures you look at. Some 600,000, North and South. I can't imagine it would be fewer than that now. I mean, we have a much larger population now. And if it was anything near that, you're talking about maybe as many as 20 million people losing their lives in this. So um, when I hear people, and I do hear people talk about, that we need a revolution. We don't need a revolution. If you want some sort of a social revolution based on you going out and protesting and voting for different people, go ahead, have fun. I encourage that. That's a good idea. But if you want open and armed conflict, um, honestly, those 20 million lives I feel like are on your hands. Their blood is on your hands. Um, and honestly, I don't know I mean, maybe some of the people talking about that really do want some sort of a communist dictatorship. That is what they're looking for. I don't think most of them do. I think they have this sort of romanticized notion that they'll make a more left-leaning socialist democracy, and that's just not how those are made. It wasn't how they were made in Europe, and it would not work here. That open and armed conflict, like I said, it draws out the worst. Those are the people who are going to take over your movement. They don't give a crap that that you didn't want it to be that extreme. They're still going to do it. They're the most brutal people, and brutality typically represses people from from opposing. I mean, just imagine you started this revolution, of civil war, um, and your country, your particular state, let's say you were in California, y'all got control of the government and made this more socialist democracy that you wanted to see. Uh, but what happens when the more extreme people in that movement start taking control? Are you really going to stand up and oppose them? You might say that you did, you just opposed another government, but they're not necessarily against all the things that you're against. In fact, they're for a lot of things that you're for. And when you see them go out and brutalize people in your own movement, and people who you could look at and say, that guy's just like me, that girl is just like me, you're not going to stand up against them. Nobody does. Nobody does, because it's human nature. It's human nature to get scared when you think that you could lose your life for what you believe. So, in my opinion here, and this is my opinion, I feel like it's always better to let's just not try to cause people to lose their lives for their beliefs. No matter what those beliefs are. There are plenty of people I disagree with on the left and the right. Some of them I disagree with a lot. I don't think it's fair for me to go out and kill them. I don't think so. Even if I really dislike what they have to say, even if they're out there spewing racist hatred nonsense, I'm still not going to go out and try and kill them. I'm just going to try and convince other people that they're idiots, and they are idiots, and most people understand that. Yeah, just let me know what you think. I'm sure some of y'all will disagree with this completely, but I don't really care. Um, and yeah, comments are appreciated. Kind of wonder if anybody's actually going to see this crap, but hey, what you gonna do? Take it easy.